crashed onto my neighbor's gazebo. How was I supposed to know that fighting back would expose a $1 million fraud scheme and bring the FBI to our quiet suburban doorsteps? Comment below where you're watching from. Blood rushed to my head as I slammed on the brakes in my driveway. My beautiful maple tree, the one that had given my home perfect shade for 15 summers, was being hacked apart by men in orange vests. The chainsaw's roar filled the air as I jumped out of my car, heart pounding against my ribs. "Stop! What are you doing to my tree?" I shouted, running across my lawn. The workers paused, looking at each other with uncertainty, but a woman in a crisp white pantsuit marched toward me from next door. Laura Wilson, the self-appointed queen of Sunshine Acres, with her perfect blonde bob and permanent scowl. "Finally, someone's taking care of this nightmare," she said, arms crossed over her chest. "Your leaves clog my gutters every fall and the roots are cracking my driveway." I ignored her, approaching the man who seemed to be in charge. "This is my property. Who authorized this?" "Beach approval, sir," he said, handing me a wrinkled paper with an official-looking stamp. Signed by Mr. Hiddleston himself. Tom Hiddleston, HOA president and Laura's golf buddy. I should have known. "I never got notice about this," I said, scanning the document with trembling hands. The letterhead looked legitimate, but something felt off. I had paid my dues religiously for years and followed every ridiculous rule about trash cans and holiday decorations. "Notice was sent 2 weeks ago," Laura chimed in, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "Maybe if you checked your mail more often." Just then my phone buzzed, a text from my elderly neighbor Brian John. "Saw the tree crew. Did they finally wear you down?" Brian had been fighting the HOA for years over his bird feeders. He understood. "This stops now," I declared, pulling out my phone to take pictures. "Until I verify this with the board." The crew chief shrugged. "Lady, we're just doing what we're paid for. Take it up with management." As I dialed Tom's number, a sickening crack split the air. One of the half-cut branches, a massive limb thicker than my waist, was giving way. The workers scrambled backward as the enormous branch crashed down with a thunderous boom right onto Laura's prized gazebo. The white lattice structure, the one she'd bragged about in 3 neighborhood newsletters, splintered like matchsticks. Her prize-winning roses were crushed beneath broken wood and leaves. Laura's scream could have shattered windows. "My gazebo! Do you see what your tree did?" She pointed a manicured finger at me, her face turning an alarming shade of red. "This is exactly why it needed to come down." The crew chief whistled low. "That's going to be expensive." My phone call to Tom went straight to voicemail. Of course it did. "This is your fault," Laura hissed, already tapping furiously on her phone. "Tom will hear about this immediately. You'll be paying for every penny of damage." I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "Your friend Tom authorized cutting my tree without my permission. If anyone's responsible for that branch falling, it's the people who weakened it by cutting it improperly." Laura's eyes narrowed. "We'll see what the board has to say about that." As if summoned by her fury, a sleek black SUV pulled up. Tom Hiddleston stepped out, his golf tan contrasting with his white polo shirt, a clipboard already in hand. "I got your text, Laura," he said, not even looking my way. "Oh my, that's quite a mess." "Tom," I said, stepping into his line of sight, "your crew is cutting down my tree without my consent." He finally acknowledged me with a thin smile. As per HOA Bylaw 7.2, trees deemed hazardous can be removed at the board's discretion. We've had 3 complaints about this maple. 3? Let me guess. "Laura, you and your wife?" I crossed my arms. "Show me where in the HOA agreement it says you can enter private property without notice." Tom's smile didn't waver. "Notice was sent, and now we have property damage that proves our point about safety concerns." "The damage happened because your crew started cutting it," I replied. "The tree was perfectly healthy." "That's not how the report will read," Laura interjected smugly, taking photos of her destroyed gazebo from multiple angles. I noticed neighbors peeking through windows and stepping onto porches. This was becoming the show of the week. Brian John now stood on his driveway, watching with concern. "Listen," Tom said, lowering his voice. "The tree is coming down one way or another. The board voted. If you fight this, we can make things very difficult. HOA fines can add up quickly." The threat hung in the air between us. I'd heard stories of people losing their homes over HOA disputes, but I never thought it would happen to me. I'm calling my lawyer, I said, pulling out my phone again. Tom shrugged. Do what you need to do, but that gazebo repair bill will be coming your way regardless. As they walked away, I heard Laura say, I told you he'd be difficult. Just like with a bird bath last year, the tree crew looked uncomfortable. Do we continue? One asked. No, I said firmly. Not today. I spent the evening researching HOA laws and taking photos of every angle of my property. The partially cut tree looked wounded, its exposed inner rings pale against the dark bark. When I checked my mail, which I admittedly hadn't done in several days due to a work trip, there was indeed a notice dated yesterday. Sleep didn't come easily that night. Around 3:00 a.m. a strange noise woke me, a car door closing. I peered through the blinds just in time to see Tom's SUV pulling away from the curb. What was he doing here at this hour? The mystery deepened the next morning when I found a certified letter in my mailbox. The HOA was suing me for $228,000, 0 cents in damages to Laura's property. They had included photographs of the fallen branch and destroyed gazebo, along with a structural engineer's report dated 3 weeks ago claiming my tree was diseased and dangerous. 3 weeks ago? But Laura had only started complaining about it last month. Something didn't add up, and I had a sinking feeling this went deeper than just a tree and a broken gazebo. As I stared at the lawsuit papers, my phone rang. It was Brian. I saw Tom sneaking around your yard last night, he said without preamble. You need to check your property line. I think there's something about your land they want. My hands shook as I tore open the certified letter that had just arrived. The return address showed Oakwood Estates Homeowners Association. My stomach dropped before I even read a word. We hereby inform you that legal action has been initiated against you in the amount of $28,000, 0 cents, for damages caused by your negligence. I nearly spit out my coffee. $28, 0 cents. For a tree they cut down without my permission? The letter claimed my failure to maintain hazardous vegetation led to catastrophic property damage to Mrs. Peterson's gazebo. There were color photos attached of her destroyed garden structure, along with repair estimates from, surprise, surprise, Tom Hiddleston's construction company. The phone rang again. It was Laura herself. I just wanted to make sure you received the HOA's letter, she said, her voice dripping with fake concern. It's such a shame about my poor gazebo. My daughter was planning her wedding reception there next month. Laura Wilson, your people cut down my tree without permission. How is this possibly my fault? I tried to keep my voice steady. Well, if you had maintained your yard properly, none of this would have happened, she sniffed. The board has documented 12 separate complaints about that eyesore. We were acting in the community's best interest. After I hung up, I paced around my kitchen, heart pounding. I couldn't afford a $28,000, 0 cents payout or the lawyer to fight it. Was I going to lose my house over this? A knock at the door broke my panic spiral. It was Brian John from 3 doors down, holding a 6-pack. Heard about the tree situation, he said. Figured you could use this. I invited him in, grateful for any friendly face. Brian had lived in the neighborhood for 20 years, long before Tom Hiddleston became HOA president. This isn't the first time they've pulled something like this, Brian said, settling onto my couch. Last summer, the Jennifers got fined $500, 0 cents because their mailbox was desert sand instead of coastal beige. The difference was barely noticeable, but Tom claimed it violated community standards. How do they get away with this, I asked. Most people just pay up. It's easier than fighting, Brian shrugged. Tom stacked the board with his friends. His construction company gets all the maintenance contracts. Laura Wilson's husband sits on the zoning board that approves Tom's development projects downtown. It's all connected. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Saw what happened to your tree. Check your property survey. A concerned neighbor. Do you have your property documents? Brian asked. The ones from when you bought the house? I dug through my filing cabinet and pulled out a folder labeled Closing Documents. Inside was a thick stack of papers, including a detailed property survey I'd never really looked at before. Brian and I spread the documents across the dining table. The survey showed property lines, easements, and structures. My eyes landed on the maple tree's location, or where it had been. Brian, I whispered, Look at this. The survey clearly marked the tree as being 2 feet inside my property line, not on the HOA common area as Tom had claimed. A sticky note from my real estate agent even highlighted it as a valuable mature tree that added to property value. They had no right to touch it, Brian said. The HOA doesn't have jurisdiction over trees fully on private property. I felt a surge of hope, quickly followed by a wave of anger. They knew. They must have known. I took photos of the survey with my phone and started searching online for HOA tree removal disputes. The search results were eye-opening. Forums filled with similar stories, news articles about lawsuits, and even specialized attorneys who handled nothing but HOA conflicts. At midnight, as Brian was leaving, he paused at the door. "Be careful," he warned. "Tom doesn't like losing. When the Morales family challenged a violation last year, someone slashed their tires the next day. No proof it was connected, of course." I couldn't sleep that night. I kept replaying the scene of coming home to find strangers cutting down my tree. The arrogance of Tom standing there with his clipboard, Laura Wilson watching from her yard with that smug smile. At 3:00 a.m. I started drafting a response letter. By dawn, I had created a folder with photos of the tree, before and after cutting, the damage to the gazebo, my property survey, and printouts of the HOA bylaws I'd found online. Section 7.3 clearly stated the association shall not remove or significantly alter any mature trees on private property without written consent of the homeowner. Around 8:00 a.m. my doorbell rang. It was Laura Wilson again, this time with a plate of muffins. "I felt terrible about our conversation yesterday," she said, though her smile didn't reach her eyes. "I thought maybe we could discuss a payment plan for the damages. I know $28,000.00 is a lot all at once." I looked at her perfectly coiffed hair, designer outfit, and the Mercedes parked in my driveway. This woman didn't care about me or my tree. This was about power and control. "Actually, Mrs. Wilson," I said calmly, "I've been reviewing my property documents. It seems there's been a mistake. That tree was fully on my private property, which means the HOA had no authority to cut it down." Her smile vanished. "Well, I'm sure Tom had proper approval." "From whom?" I interrupted. "The tree was on my property. I never gave permission. In fact, according to Section 7.3 of the HOA bylaws, what happened might actually be considered destruction of private property." Laura's face hardened. "You really don't want to make enemies here. We've built a nice community with nice property values. Nobody wants a troublemaker." As she walked away, my phone pinged with an email. The subject line made my blood run cold. "Urgent, lien notice, OCHOA. They were putting a lien on my house for the unpaid damages. Could they really take my home over a tree I never wanted cut down? What dark secrets was this seemingly perfect neighborhood hiding behind its manicured lawns and matching mailboxes? My hands were shaking as I pushed open the glass doors to the community center. The monthly HOA meeting was already underway. About 30 neighbors were seated in neat rows facing the board members at their elevated table. I spotted Laura Wilson in the front row, her platinum blonde hair styled in that perfect bob that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage. "Excuse me," I said loudly, interrupting Tom Hiddleston mid-sentence about new pool regulations. "I need to address the board about an urgent matter." Every head turned. Some neighbors looked away quickly, avoiding eye contact. Others stared with open curiosity. I'd never spoken up at these meetings before. Tom's smile didn't reach his eyes. "We have a procedure for bringing up new business. You needed to submit your request 2 weeks in advance. I think destroying my property without permission jumps to the front of the line," I replied, my voice steadier than I expected. The room went completely silent. Laura Wilson stood up, her designer purse clutched tightly. "That eyesore was dropping leaves and branches into my yard for years. My husband nearly broke his ankle last fall." "Please sit down, Margaret," Tom said smoothly. "Sir, if you have a complaint, you can fill out the proper form." "And I already filled out your forms 3 times, I said, moving to the center of the room. "While I was waiting for a response that never came, you sent people to cut down my tree without my permission, and now you're suing me for the damage your people caused." A few neighbors whispered to each other. I noticed Brian John in the back, giving me a thumbs up. Tom's face hardened. That tree was clearly in violation of HOA landscaping guidelines, Section 8, Paragraph 3, which states nothing about trees that predate the HOA's existence, came a calm voice from behind me. Elizabeth walked in, carrying a leather briefcase. She looked every bit the powerhouse attorney in her navy suit. I'd found her through Brian's recommendation. She specialized in property disputes and had fought HOAs before. "And you are?" Tom Hiddleston asked, clearly irritated by yet another interruption. "Elizabeth, attorney at law," she replied coolly, stepping forward. "I represent the homeowner whose property rights were violated when this board authorized the destruction of a mature maple tree valued at approximately $15,000.00." Laura Wilson scoffed from the front row, her voice sharp. $15.00? For that ugly tree? Ridiculous. Elizabeth offered a slight smile. "Actually, that's a conservative estimate from our arborist. Mature trees significantly boost property values. I assume this board knows that, considering your obsession with community standards." I stepped up and placed my property survey on the projector. The digital image lit up the screen, showing the precise lot lines. I pointed to the clear mark. "As you can see, the tree was entirely on my property, exactly 2 feet inside the boundary. The HOA had no legal right to touch it." A wave of murmurs rolled through the room. A woman in the back called out, "Is this true, Tom? Was the tree on private property?" Tom's face flushed a deep red. "That survey must be outdated. Our landscaping jurisdiction ends at my property line," I said firmly. "I have the original survey from when the house was built, plus a more recent one from last year when I installed my garden shed. They both confirmed the same boundary." Laura Wilson stood again, flustered. "That tree blocked my view of the sunset. My property value was suffering." Elizabeth raised an eyebrow. "Interesting that you bring up property value, Mrs. Wilson, because cutting down a neighbor's tree without permission is a criminal offense in this state, and when an HOA board authorizes it, that could be conspiracy." A nervous-looking man on the board, Jenkins, whispered something to Tom. He waved him off. "We acted in good faith," Tom insisted. "Multiple complaints were submitted. The tree posed a safety risk." "Then why didn't you get an arborist's report?" I countered. "I have one, dated last spring, confirming the tree was healthy." I handed copies of the assessment to each board member. Several neighbors stood to get a better look. Tom glanced at the document and tossed it aside. "This changes nothing. The tree fell and damaged Mrs. Wilson's property. You're still responsible as the owner." Elizabeth's smile sharpened. "When someone improperly cuts a tree and causes it to fall, they assume liability for the damage. Your contractors weakened it against the property owner's wishes. That's what caused the branch to fall." Laura Wilson's face turned a dangerous shade of purple. "This is absurd. Tom, do something." Another neighbor, Mrs. Garcia, stood up. "I'd like to know why the board approved cutting down a tree on private property without the owner's consent. That doesn't sound right." Tom banged his gavel. "This discussion is over. We'll address the matter privately with the parties involved." "Actually," Elizabeth interjected, "my client prefers transparency, which is why we've prepared this." She handed a set of documents to each board member. "This is our countersuit for the tree's value, emotional damages, and trespassing." Gasps echoed throughout the room. Neighbors crowded around, some snapping photos of the documents with their phones. "You can't sue the HOA," Tom shouted, standing up. "Your HOA agreement states all disputes must go through arbitration." Elizabeth smiled again. "I've reviewed the agreement. It doesn't cover criminal trespass or destruction of property. Also, we've filed a police report regarding unauthorized entry and damages." The color drained from Tom's face. Laura Wilson looked like she might faint. "This meeting is adjourned," Tom barked, slamming the gavel repeatedly as neighbors began filing out. Several stopped to speak with me. "They've gone too far this time," one elderly man whispered. "That board thinks they run everything." As Elizabeth and I headed toward the exit, Tom caught up to us in the hallway. His polite public facade vanished. He grabbed my arm tightly. "You don't know who you're dealing with," he hissed. "I have connections in this town that can make your life miserable." Elizabeth calmly pried his fingers from my arm. "That sounds a lot like a threat, Mr. Hiddleston. Would you care to rephrase that, with witnesses present?" Tom straightened his tie, backing away. "I'm simply advising your client that fighting the HOA is a losing battle. Everyone who tries regrets it." We walked to the parking lot in silence. I turned to Elizabeth. What happens next? They'll try to scare you into dropping the suit. Stand firm. I've seen bullies like Tom fold when properly challenged. What I didn't tell her was that I'd spent the entire night researching Tom Hiddleston's construction company. It had numerous complaints filed, and suspiciously that same company had received every HOA maintenance contract for years. When I dug deeper, what I found made my blood run cold. At 7:15 a.m. my doorbell rang. I answered in pajamas to find Detective Michael holding 2 coffees. "Mind if I come in? This couldn't wait," she said, face stern. My hands trembled as I took the coffee. "Just yesterday I filed a basic police report," I said. "Now you're here?" Michael nodded. "Your HOA president, Tom Hiddleston, set off alarm bells across 3 departments. We've been monitoring his construction company for almost a year." I leaned forward. "Because of my tree?" "Your tree was just the tip of the iceberg. Look at these." She spread photos across my table. Images of maintenance trucks at our community center. Thornton Construction charged $65,000 0 cents for emergency roof repairs that should have cost $20 0 cents max. "That's why your fees went up last year. Tom said it was due to insurance." My jaw dropped. "It gets worse," Michael said, highlighting contract records. "Every maintenance contract over the past 5 years went to Tom's company. No competitive bids, no oversight, just him signing checks to himself." "That's illegal," I breathed. "How did no one notice?" "Fear and friendship," she said simply. "Board members who objected, they got fined or pushed out. The ones who stayed, they got perks. Laura Wilson's new fencing, for example, violates the HOA's own design rules, but she got a waiver." I thought of the neighbors who had moved away after fights with the HOA. "It wasn't just the rules," I murmured. "It was who you knew." Michael nodded. "Speaking of Laura Wilson, did you know her husband works for the city?" "Bob Wilson? Sure, I thought he sat on some zoning board." "Not just any board. He's on the zoning commission that approved Hiddleston's latest development project downtown, right after the HOA gave his company another exclusive contract." I stared down at the files. What had started with my maple tree had grown into something much, much darker. "Peterson is on some board," I shrugged. "Not just any board," Michael corrected, his tone firm. "He's on the zoning commission that approved Tom Hiddleston's controversial Westlake development last year, the one that got rushed through despite serious environmental concerns." My mind raced. So when Laura Wilson complained about my tree, she wasn't just being petty. "My property backed up to the creek that fed directly into the Westlake project," Michael continued. "That development is having drainage issues. Their environmental consultants have been looking for someone to blame for supposed water contamination." I jumped up, nearly knocking over my coffee. "That's why they wanted my tree gone? To take soil samples?" Michael nodded. "The tree removal company told us they were specifically instructed to dig out as much of the root system as possible, which is highly unusual unless they wanted access to the soil underneath." I finished. I pulled out my phone and showed him the photos I'd taken of the strange holes in my backyard after the tree was cut. I had assumed they were part of the removal process, but now I realized they were too evenly spaced, too deliberate. Michael studied the images closely. "They were testing your soil, looking for anything they could pin on you." "But my tree couldn't possibly be causing problems for a development 2 miles downstream." "It doesn't have to be true," he replied. "It just has to be plausible enough for Tom Hiddleston to get city inspectors, who might owe favors to Bob Peterson, to issue violations. Enough violations and you might be forced to sell." My stomach dropped. "They want my property. Your lot sits at a critical drainage point. If Tom's company controls it, they can redirect blame for any environmental issues away from their development." I paced across the kitchen, my mind spinning. "So this whole lawsuit about Laura's gazebo, it's a distraction." "Exactly. They need you financially drained and stressed, hoping you'll give up and move." "What about the other neighbors? Brian John's been helping me fight this." Michael's expression darkened. "Brian submitted 3 complaints last year about suspicious HOA accounting, all mysteriously lost by the board secretary." I exhaled. "So what do we do now?" "This has gone beyond a local matter," Michael said, closing his folders. "The money trail crosses state lines. Your HOA uses a management company based in Nevada." I've contacted the FBI's white-collar crime division." "The FBI?" I whispered, suddenly feeling the weight of what we were uncovering. "This is bigger than just your tree, or even Oak Estates. Tom Hiddleston's company has contracts with at least 6 other HOAs in the county. We're looking at potentially millions in fraudulent billing, kickbacks, bribes to city officials." Just then my phone buzzed. An email notification. I glanced at the subject line and felt my stomach twist. "The HOA just placed a lien on my house for unpaid emergency assessments." Michael leaned forward. "How much?" $122,000, 0 cents, I said, my voice shaking. "How can they do that without notifying me?" Michael pulled out his phone. "They're moving faster than we expected. Placing a lien is the first step to force a sale. I need to call my supervisor and the FBI contact Matthew immediately." As Michael stepped outside to make the call, I sat down at my kitchen table, staring at the scattered evidence. Photos of Tom Hiddleston shaking hands with city officials, spreadsheets with inflated contracts, maps of the Westlake development, with my lot circled in red. My quiet life had been upended over a tree. Now I was caught in the middle of a small-town corruption ring involving my HOA, city officials, and developers. Out the window, I saw Laura Wilson standing by my mailbox on the phone, staring directly at my house. When she noticed me watching, she didn't look away. Instead, she smiled and waved. A challenge. Michael returned, face grim. "The FBI wants to move quickly, but they need more evidence. Can you attend the HOA meeting tonight and record it discreetly? We need to hear how Tom explains this lien to the other homeowners." "Won't that be dangerous? If they are already targeting me, we'll have plainclothes officers nearby," he assured me. "Just act like you're still fighting about the tree. Pretend you haven't connected it to their bigger scheme." As he gathered his files, Michael paused. "One more thing. Have you noticed anyone unusual around your property lately? Delivery people, workers you didn't expect?" A chill ran down my spine. "The cable company came yesterday, but I didn't call them. They said they were doing routine maintenance." Michael's eyes narrowed. "Show me where they worked." I led him to the living room where the cable box sat. He pulled a small scanner from his bag and waved it near the TV setup. It beeped rapidly. "Just as I thought," he muttered. He pulled out a tiny black device no larger than a thumbtack from behind the cable box. "They're listening to you." My throat tightened. "What else do they know?" "About what we know." That night I woke to the sound of shattering glass. Someone had thrown a rock through my front window. Wrapped around it was a note. "Leave now, or worse will come." My hands trembled as I called the police. I already knew who was behind it. Officer Jenkins arrived and began photographing the damage. "4th incident this week," he muttered. "You really stirred up a hornet's nest." I hadn't just stirred it, I was getting stung. The day after I received court papers about the lien, Laura Wilson transformed into a one-woman army. She stood at the end of my driveway each morning, taking photos of my house and scribbling notes. When I tried to speak to her, she turned her back. Yesterday, she hissed, "You're gonna wish you never moved here. Nobody goes against the HOA and wins." I decided to fight with facts. Brian John helped me print and distribute flyers, copies of the property survey, photos of the tree, and proof that HOA hired workers had cut it down without permission. We delivered them to every doorstep. Laura struck back by calling an emergency HOA meeting at her house, only inviting her ally. I watched from my kitchen as 24 neighbors filed into her oversized colonial. Not one looked my way. The next morning, I found my mailbox flattened. 3 neighbors who'd spoken to me privately had their car tires slashed. "This isn't about a tree anymore," Brian said, helping me install security cameras. "They're scared of what you might expose." The cameras violated HOA rules about unapproved modifications, but I no longer cared. Just hours after we set them up, a violation notice was taped to my door, a $100, 0 cents daily fine for each camera. That night, while eating dinner, my phone buzzed with a motion alert. I tapped the screen and nearly dropped my fork. Tom Hiddleston was in my backyard. Alongside him were 2 HOA board members I recognized from past meetings. They carried small tools and plastic bags, moving methodically. They weren't just snooping, they were collecting soil samples. My hand trembled as I hit record. I had them. Now what? entered my backyard carrying small tools and plastic bags. They moved with purpose, taking samples from the soil near where my tree had stood. One of them pulled out what looked like a testing kit and seemed excited by whatever results he saw. They high-fived each other before sneaking away through the side gate. I called Elizabeth immediately and sent her the footage. "They're absolutely desperate," she said after watching it. "They're trying to manufacture evidence of soil contamination to force you out on environmental grounds. This is crossing into criminal trespassing." I couldn't sleep that night. Every car that drove by made me jump. I kept replaying Michael's words in my head about Tom Hiddleston's company being under investigation. This wasn't just about a tree or even about HOA rules anymore. Something much bigger was at stake. The next morning I found bright orange environmental hazard signs staked around the perimeter of my yard. Neighbors walking their dogs crossed to the other side of the street to avoid my house. One woman actually covered her child's face as they hurried past. Laura Wilson stood in her driveway pointing at my house while talking to an elderly couple who nodded along with concerned faces. When she spotted me watching, she smiled. Not a friendly smile, but the kind a predator gives when cornering its prey. I called Michael to update him. "This is moving faster than we expected," he said, his voice tense. "They're trying to force you out before we can complete our investigation. Agent Matthew from the FBI needs to meet with you today." 3 hours later, I sat at my kitchen table across from Matthew, a serious woman with quick eyes that missed nothing. She reviewed my security footage and photographs of the signs. "We've been building a case against Hiddleston's company for months," she explained. "Money laundering through inflated HOA maintenance contracts, kickbacks, bribes to city officials. Your tree dispute accidentally shined a light on their operation, and now they're scrambling." "So what do I do?" I asked, feeling both relieved that this wasn't all in my head and terrified about being caught in something so dangerous. "We need you to continue acting normally," Matthew instructed. "Don't let them know we're building a case. The more desperate they get, the more mistakes they'll make." I agreed, but maintaining normal became impossible that afternoon when 5 official-looking people in hazmat suits showed up to take more soil samples from my yard. Neighbors gathered on the sidewalk, watching and whispering. Laura moved among them, nodding gravely and pointing toward my house. "It's worse than we thought," I overheard her say loudly. "The contamination could affect the whole neighborhood's water supply. Our children could get sick." The hazmat team, which I strongly suspected was fake, placed more warning signs around my property. A news van pulled up and Laura rushed over to speak with the reporter before I could get outside. By evening, my phone was blowing up with texts from concerned neighbors I hadn't heard from in weeks, all suddenly worried about toxic chemicals under my house. At 9:00 p.m., a courier delivered a thick envelope to my door. Inside was a notice that the HOA had scheduled an emergency vote in 2 days to begin legal proceedings to force me to sell my house and leave the neighborhood immediately. The document cited imminent environmental danger, continuous rule violations, and, most absurdly, hostile actions against HOA leadership. I called Elizabeth, who answered despite the late hour. "They're panicking," she said after I read her the notice. "This vote is completely outside their authority, but that won't stop them from trying to intimidate you and turn the neighborhood against you." As we were talking, another security alert buzzed on my phone. I switched to the camera app and froze. Tom Hiddleston and Laura Wilson were at my front door placing something against it. I watched in real time as Laura pulled out a marker and wrote on a large poster before taping it to my door. When they left, I cautiously opened the door to find a crude sign. "Toxic resident. Neighborhood vote Thursday, 7:00 p.m. Your last chance to leave with dignity." I went back inside and emailed the new footage to Agent Matthew. Within minutes, she called back. "This changes our timeline," she said firmly. "We need to move before this vote happens. Can you attend the meeting and record everything?" "I'll be there," I promised, a mix of fear and determination settling in my stomach. What I didn't know then was that Laura Wilson had already convinced the city inspector, her husband's poker buddy, to come declare my house unsafe for occupancy the very next morning. My stomach twisted into knots as I walked into the packed community center. Everyone turned to stare at me, some with pity, others with hate in their eyes. Laura sat in the front row, wearing her signature pearl necklace, nudging her friends and pointing at me with a smug smile. She'd spent all week calling neighbors to make sure they showed up to vote me out. "That's the troublemaker," she whispered, loudly enough for me to hear. "Can you believe he's still fighting after what his tree did to my beautiful gazebo?" I took a deep breath and found a seat in the back row, just like Agent Matthew had told me to do. My hands were shaking so badly I had to stuff them in my pockets. The agent had given me a special pen that was actually a recording device, and I worried everyone could see it sticking out of my shirt pocket. Tom Hiddleston strolled to the front of the room like he owned the place, tapping the microphone 3 times. He wore an expensive suit and that fake smile that never reached his eyes. "Good evening, neighbors and friends," he announced, scanning the room until his gaze landed on me. His smile dropped for just a second. "Tonight we face a serious threat to our community's safety and property values." On the big screen behind him, a picture of my house popped up. People gasped when they saw the security cameras I had installed. "As you can see," Tom continued, clicking to show more pictures, "one resident continues to defy our rules. Unauthorized surveillance equipment, failure to clean up after the dangerous tree removal, and now," he paused for effect, "we have evidence of something even more disturbing." The next slide showed Tom and his buddies in my backyard at night, digging up soil samples. Of course, he didn't mention they were trespassing. "Our tests show concerning levels of contaminants that could affect the entire neighborhood's water supply," Tom announced gravely. The room filled with worried whispers. Laura Wilson stood up without being called on. "I told everyone the property was trouble from the start. My little Pomeranian won't even walk on that side of the street anymore. Animals can sense these things." I wanted to jump up and defend myself, but Agent Matthew's instructions echoed in my head. "Don't react. Let them dig their own hole deeper." Brian John, my only ally on the block, raised his hand. "Could we see those soil test results, and who performed them?" Tom waved him off. "My company has specialists for this sort of thing. The technical details aren't important right now." "Seems convenient," Brian muttered, but most people ignored him. Tom Hiddleston clicked to another slide showing a copy of the HOA bylaws, with specific sections highlighted in red. According to Section 23, Paragraph C, he declared, "The board can vote to begin eviction proceedings against any homeowner who presents a clear and present danger to community welfare." Laura Wilson nodded enthusiastically. "It's for the safety of our children." I looked around at my neighbors, people I'd waved to every morning for 5 years. Most avoided eye contact. Some looked uncomfortable, but no one else spoke up. Tom continued, his voice gaining momentum. "Before we vote, I should mention that fighting this action will be expensive and futile. Our HOA has the full backing of my company's legal team." He didn't notice the community center's back door opening. A woman in casual clothes slipped in and sat quietly, Detective Michael pretending to be late. "Now then," Tom said, "all in favor of beginning eviction proceedings." The main doors burst open with a loud bang. Everyone jumped. 3 individuals in dark blue jackets with FBI in bold yellow letters stepped inside, followed by 4 others carrying boxes and briefcases. "What is the meaning of this interruption?" Tom sputtered, his face turning red. "We're in the middle of an important community vote." Agent Matthew stepped forward, flashing his badge. "Tom Hiddleston, I'm Special Agent Matthew with the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. We have federal warrants to search all HOA financial records, your business documents, and electronic devices." The room erupted with shocked voices. Laura Wilson leapt to her feet, her pearl necklace bouncing against her chest. "This is outrageous. Tom is a respected businessman." Agent Matthew ignored her and signaled to his team. "We also have warrants for Margaret Wilson, James Jenkins, and Sarah Williams as board members engaged in this activity." Laura's face went from angry red to ghost white in seconds. "This is all a misunderstanding. I barely even look at the financial reports." Tom lunged for his laptop, but an agent intercepted him. "Sir, please step away from the computer. Attempting to destroy evidence is a separate federal offense." "Evidence of what?" someone called from the crowd. Detective Michael stood up. "The Oakett Estates HOA has been under investigation for 6 months. We have reason to believe over $1 million of homeowner fees have been embezzled through fraudulent contracts." The crowd's reaction was like a shockwave. Neighbors turned to each other, mouths open. "That's why our fees kept going up," shouted Mr. Jennifer from across the room. "I can barely afford the $600 0 cents a month." Laura tried to push past an agent toward the exit. "I need to check on my dog." "Ma'am, please remain seated," the agent said firmly. Tom straightened his tie and tried to compose himself. "My attorneys will clear this up immediately. This is clearly a vindictive action orchestrated by—" He pointed at me. "That troublemaker who refused to follow our reasonable rules." I finally stood. All eyes turned to me. My voice came out steadier than I expected. "The tree was just the beginning. When they came after me, I started asking questions, looking at public records, following the money. I pulled out copies of the contracts I had uncovered. Tom's company charged the HOA triple the normal rate for simple repairs. They've been stealing from all of us for years." "Lies!" Laura shrieked, but her voice wavered. Brian John stood beside me. "Is it a lie that your husband approved Tom's development project right after the HOA gave his company an exclusive landscaping contract?" Laura's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came. One of the agents projected a file from Tom's computer onto the big screen. It was a spreadsheet listing all our names, addresses, and notes about which residents might pose compliance issues. Next to my name it read, "Target for removal, property needed for detention pond expansion." "What's a detention pond?" someone asked. Agent Matthews stepped forward. "It's a requirement for Mr. Hiddleston's new development project 3 blocks over. Without it, he can't build his condos. According to these documents, he planned to force several of you out to create space for it." Chaos erupted. Neighbors who had ignored me for months crowded around with apologies and questions. Laura sat alone, abandoned by her allies, staring at her lap. Tom was read his rights in the corner as the FBI began interviewing residents one by one. I stepped outside for air. The night was quiet except for distant sirens. I looked down my street at the identical houses with perfect lawns. For the first time in months, I felt like I might actually get to keep mine. They cut down my tree without permission. That branch? It crushed my neighbor's gazebo. I thought I was in trouble until I uncovered a $1 million HOA fraud scheme and brought the FBI straight to our suburban doorstep. So what's the lesson here? Never assume you're powerless, especially when you're right. In today's world, it's easy to be intimidated by paperwork, legal threats, or power-hungry HOA presidents. But remember, rules without oversight become weapons. Bullies like Tom Hiddleston and Laura Wilson count on you staying quiet, scared, and isolated. Here's what you can do. Document everything, know your rights, build community with neighbors, and when the moment comes, don't flinch. Fight smart. Because sometimes the thing they try to take from you, like a tree, is just a distraction from what they really want: your land, your silence, your dignity. If you've ever been harassed by an HOA, threatened with bogus fines, or just love seeing justice served cold, follow and subscribe to the HOA Revenge YouTube channel right now. We tell the real stories they don't want you to hear. Stand tall, stay sharp, and never underestimate the power of one neighbor who says, "Enough."